seeing numbers are going up and down. So, at 6:35, we can go ahead and jump into the conversation. And then,
Sure.
hopefully people will join us as they come in, and we'll see how that goes.
Sure.
Um, so I will start off with a little intro that I typed up. I got little actual words and things to say a couple of things. So, um, but first, I just want to say thanks everyone for joining us this evening in one of our first conversations in sort of this new era of Stonewall. As I'm excited to be here. Denzel Porty, see him as the new executive director as of January this year. I've been the interim executive director since June. But one of the things we're really trying to ensure that we do within the community is to expose the community to new and different ideas, to help them understand the diversity of our spectrum, of our rainbow. That what we've got so many letters, LGBTQIA. What does it all mean? But also just to help people understand that our queer community is much more than just cis white gay men, right? We are a lot of different things. And this is part of that conversation and dialogue for us, is to explore the identities under that umbrella. So for those who don't know, Stonewall Columbus was founded in 1981 as Central Ohio's LGBTQ community organization, and we are currently a center as well, located in Columbus, Ohio. Stonewall works to provide and support and connection to needed resources for the LGBTQIA community and allied communities across Central Ohio. We are also the producers of Columbus's annual Pride programs. So that's our Pride March and Parade. And that welcomes about 800,000 people to the Central Ohio region annually. We are the second largest Pride event in the Midwest, right behind Chicago's events. Of course, if you would like more information about Stonewall Columbus and our programs, please do visit stonewallcolumbus.org and you'll get more information there. Tonight, I am particularly excited to be in conversation with trans and Trumpland filmmaker Tony Zosherafatain. And I've been practicing. I was practicing, and I was like, I need to say it right. I don't want to mess it up.
That's perfect.
It's oftentimes funny for me. I feel like the easier names are the ones that are harder to sometimes say. But I'm so excited to be here in conversation with you this evening as well. And so I want to just give a little background about the film and where we're doing before jumping into the meat and potatoes of the conversation. So Trans and Trumpland investigates the impact of anti-trans policies on the lives of 4 transgender Americans, told through a road trip narrative across remote parts of the United States. The series explores the trans experience in Texas, North Carolina, Mississippi, and Idaho. And of course, set against the backdrop of increasing rates of transphobic violence, Trans and Trumpland shows the grim realities that trans Americans face. Production was completed in 2019, and Trans and Trumpland was released just last month, not too long ago, on February 25th, and is now streaming on a number of major on-demand video platforms. Trans and Trumpland was produced by Transwave Films, a New York City-based trans-led company. And the series was directed again by Tony here, who identifies as a transgender filmmaker. Tony began directing films in 2012 after realizing that there weren't many movies exactly or exclusively about trans people. He's previously directed I Am the T, a documentary series about the trans experience around the world. Tony has been accepted into domestic international film festivals, and has been featured in The New Yorker, The New York Times, New York Magazine, BuzzFeed, BBC News, Vice, and Out Magazine. And so it is my pleasure to join into the conversation and welcome Tony with us this evening. So, Tony, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much, Denzel, and thank you all for hosting me. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I've been to Ohio before. It's an awesome state, and I'm just really looking forward to diving in, and whatever questions y'all have, I'm down for.
Wonderful, great. Well, so the first question is, if I were to meet you out and about at a cocktail reception or wherever, and someone said, "You've got to meet this guy," who's Tony? Tell me about Tony. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of cocktails and just being out, I miss everything about being in person, including this, plus film festivals, plus everything. I can't wait for this to knock on wood here, be over.
I'll do it too.
be over soon. So, shout out to all the LGBTQ plus people that have made it through this pandemic, and we're fighting and we're doing good under Biden. So yeah, if people met me in person, I think they would say he's definitely very outgoing. He's friendly. I'm very interested in other people's like journeys as well, which is why I love like doing documentaries. I also love being trans as well. I just think it's awesome to be trans and queer. And I'm creative. I'm probably a little bit like, what do you call it, eclectic? Because I love art, but I also love sports. So I'm like, so I guess I kind of have no generic labels. So that's why it's like people usually say like optimistic too. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And Tony, are you from New York? Like, is that where your journey begins, or are you a transplant to New York?
Yeah, transplant. I'm originally from Boston, and I am first generation American. So I was born in Boston to an Iranian father and a Greek mother,
Wow.
and they were born abroad. And I just have like one sibling. Grew up in Boston, but brought myself to New York City to transition actually, because I knew that my parents wouldn't be accepting. So, sorry, my phone is like going off. So
Okay. I hope it's good news, whatever it is.
Sorry about that. Okay, so yeah, I was born in Boston, but I moved to New York City a decade ago in 2010, and I did that for a variety of reasons. One is like actually personal safety to transition, because I knew that my parents wouldn't be accepting, and like neither was my brother, and they disowned me for 2 years. So yeah, and then I moved to New York in 2010. So I'm a transplant, and I love it, but also it's complicated sometimes. It's very off and on.
Not an original New Yorker, and I grew up in New York. And so there's a commonality there. Technically, I guess I'm not first generation because I was born in Jamaica, West Indies, and I moved to New York when I was really young. But it's one of those cities where you love hate it. I think at least I love hate it. So I love to visit now. Don't know if I want to live there again. But it's such an eclectic city that you are able to connect with so many different types of people, which is something that I think is valuable, you know, for so many people.
Yeah.
Was like as you talked about, sort of the transition started when you moved to New York, but did you feel like you were finding a new community there when you came from Boston, or what was that like?
Yeah, totally. And like you said, ditto to it being like this place, I feel like New York, where you can find yourself. And I feel like that's what drew me to it from Boston, because no shade to Boston, but it's a little boring. So it's great. It has great sports and all that, but like it's not really the place to be for like art and finding trans queer community.
Yeah,
So I knew I had to make a decision. Yeah, like no shade to my hometown,
it's
but it's
true.
great. It created cool filmmakers, Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, some other people. But yeah, it's a little boring. So when I brought myself to New York in 2010, I did it for a variety of reasons. I knew that there was like, you could kind of make yourself, whatever that cheesy quote is about New York City. But I knew I had to make a decision. I had a very, very bad gut feeling at the age of 22 back in 2010 that my parents weren't going to be accepting of me coming out as trans and saying like I need to physically transition. And so I knew that I could find this new community and this new source of support and love in friends. And what I did was this speaks like the power of organizations like Stonewall Columbus. I networked with the Pride Center there, the LGBT Pride Center. They had a trans masculine support group. And through there, I was able to find resources to transition and find friends who were also trans masculine who could support me during those like 2 years I didn't talk to my family when I came out. So New York is a bit of I view it as like a safe haven, I think, for a lot of trans and queer people. And yeah, it's like a love-hate relationship now.
Well, and hopefully it always will be that, actually, because I think I will always love hate New York. It makes it that much more important of a piece in my story, and hopefully yours.
Yeah, exactly.
It's interesting because you talk about this notion of community, and you've highlighted that, and I think as we get older, or as the world has sort of evolved, we understand the importance of community, right? Like we want to be a part of this bigger thing, but we also realize there's such importance about finding people who look like you, who have commonality and experiences, who can understand your story when you share it and speak that frame of language. And so this next question, I think, is sort of maybe I'm leading. Someone probably tell me I'm leading. If I were in court, they'd be like, "You're leading." But as I think about like the inspiration, for why you said, "Hey, this is a film that we've got to make," right? Like this is a thing. I think I think it's about community, right? That's what I think. But what is it that inspired you to create this, to create this film, to create this documentary, to tell these individual stories?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I feel like for me, going back to like my motivation for creating film and art and like social activism is like I felt really, really upset the first night that, or when Trump won, when I saw it on MSNBC with my mom saying like Trump won, and I was like, I remember looking at my mom, I was like, seriously? And we're both like shocked, right? Because she was a huge like Democrat, and this is like back in Massachusetts, we're watching together. And I remember feeling really like scared, uneasy, very, very like anxious about what was going to happen because that first 24 hours, he removed any mention of LGBTQ rights from the White House website. All Obama era protections removed. So I thought to myself, like, this isn't a good start. It's only going to get worse for marginalized groups in the country. So I thought to myself, like, what exactly can I do to fight back and resist and use my skills as a filmmaker to tell people stories? So kind of like my motivation for creating Trans and Trumpland and also just in general documentary filmmaking is like just a genuine interest in showing social inequalities in the US and also kind of putting like the most marginalized groups at the forefront of like my storytelling. And also just for me, I knew that I kind of like had this passion for like road tripping and uncovering a lot of like inequalities in the US and also just like seeing new places. So I was like, how can I combine like all these passions together and create something that's like going to help trans and queer people? So yeah, that's what I would say.
So many, I like so many places to go that I think about here. Um, how did you decide on locations? Like, was that also like, yeah, like did people just volunteered, or was it more like I've got some friends here? Because I mean, I think what I also appreciate, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but like I also appreciate like the diversity of people that you explored, which I think is just, I mean, all of these areas are so different in terms of our country, and so I think that's also like fascinating. Like was that by happenstance, or were you very intentional in saying I'm going to go to North Carolina, which is so different from Idaho, which is nothing like Mississippi? Like,
No, totally. I was like back in 2016 when we like developed the series, and then we started like researching more in 2018. Like, where are we gonna go? What are we gonna do? At that point, we had a 30-page list of anti-trans and anti-queer policies that were like either passed by Trump, some kind of rhetoric, or anti-trans like state policies that he supported, right? So I was like, oh my God, where can we go? And I'm like, I wish our budget could fit like all of these like 45 states. But then I was like, I gotta limit it to like 5 max. So what we did was we were like, okay, we can kind of do this cool kind of square around the country. So like North Carolina down to Mississippi, then Texas, then Idaho. So like geography like that. And then I was like, well, we can do 4. It'll fit our budget. And also we'll make the series too long. And if we did it as a feature film, it wouldn't make the film too long. So what I did was I researched like, what are the kind of worst states out there? Like really bad. Like if someone's gonna say what's horrible, North Carolina, HB2, the anti-trans bathroom bill, that was really bad. Mississippi's like we don't even believe trans people exist. That's really bad. Texas is horrible for trans people and immigrants. It's a really bad like border wall state. Okay, that's somewhere we gotta go. Idaho is like, a wild card in the sense that like they're similar to Mississippi. Like, do trans people exist? And I think they were one of the states recently that their anti-trans like youth athlete bill became the model for other similar bills in other states. So I was like, cool, congrats Idaho on that. So we realized like those are the states. Then I thought about, well, I actually know 2 people in one in Texas, one in Idaho that are like friends. So I asked them, I asked Rebecca in Texas, I said, would you like to be part of the full series? We knew each other from Facebook. She said, oh yeah, definitely. Shane Ortega in Idaho. He's a big military activist. We have been Facebook friends for 5 years. I said, Shane, would you like to be part of this? He said, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead. North Carolina and Mississippi was a little bit more difficult. I will say the hardest person to find for the series when we decided on that state was North Carolina, because finding like Ash who could consent under 18 with a supportive mom, that took a couple of like, families to interview. I think we passed on like 5 other people until we found Ash and Daisy, and we found them through like a PFLAG group there. And then for Mississippi, I got a little lucky. As I posted on Facebook, I was like, does anybody know a trans activist in Jackson, Mississippi? And there you go. I got connected to Ivana, who runs a states only nonprofit. So it was like a combo of researching the states like policies, networking a ton, and like the trans queer internet coming through.
It's so funny. Funny, maybe I'll use the term funny. Where I think, behind the scenes, right? If you are a filmmaker, or we understand how tied to budget you have to be, right?
Yeah.
And so it's sort of like you have a desire, as you said, to travel to all 45 states and figure out what's going on at the time, right? And think about what policies are happening in those places and connect with people. But budget sort of oftentimes limits us to what we can do in terms of engagement. But it seems like you took a really intentional and thoughtful path forward to get a diversity of stories, and to be able to, I think Texas is a perfect one, to be able to blend these intersectional identities in places as well, right? Like that's a dual story in terms of the Texas example that you brought up. How long did it take you to sort of make that arc, right? Like I think you mentioned when you started talking about it in 2016, so right, but what was that process of like, okay, we've got all 4 stories in the first year, or I'm in the middle of doing a filming of an interview sort of road show, and I know that we are building things out as like weeks before we land. Like, did you feel like the intentionality of the work was like something that was finished within that real quickly in 2016 2017 period, or did you find that like things kept unfolding and you were sort of attaching and creating the story as you went along?
Yes. No, it's such a journey. And like even now, 5 years later from 2016, I'm like, wow, the world has changed so much. Like all the hard work and like what went into it, like all of a sudden become clear now. And what it was like thinking about once we locked in those 4 states and 4 kind of characters that are featured in the series in 2018, I realized like, okay, well, what can we do to get our budget? And sometimes being a trans or queer indie filmmaker, it's really hard to get access to funding, especially for a larger budget that it took for this series. And so I had to get creative. I did a Kickstarter. I leaned into my community for support, grants, all of that. It was like a big kind of community effort. And really the hardest part along this journey and this arc to get to Trans Trumpland was the funding. And it's really sad because I do think that a lot of queer trans filmmakers face a lot when it comes to like funding their projects. So what it took was once we had our successful budget in place, then we kind of kicked it into gear in terms of like what logistically can we do to make this like the best kind of journey. And we really kind of took it. I actually went to Idaho first, which is like interesting because Idaho is the last state. So what we did was we realized that like Idaho at that time of year was not going to be as cold as December in Mississippi. So it was a little bit of like talking to my producer Jamie and being like, well, what makes sense like not have the crew freeze? So it was a little bit of like backwards work. And then we actually did Texas second, then North Carolina, then Mississippi. So I think like for me, like kind of going from that journey of development and funding then to production once we figured out our plan about like where would we go. And another thing I will reveal is it wasn't an actual road trip because we just flew and then we rented the same red car and then it came together. But hey, that's filmmaking and
Movie
whatnot.
magic.
So yeah, so kind of like I think once we figured that out and we had our cast together and we had our production plan together, then the story along the way kind of came through in the editing phase. So while we were on production, I actually didn't know how much I would reveal about my mom in the story when we were filming. But then in post-production and editing, we realized like, okay, Tony, you need to connect this more. I had a conversation with my editor. He's like, you need to connect the 4 characters a little bit more. So probably revealing more about with voiceovers, your journey with your family, your journey with your mom, because as people will see in the series, there's a lot of motherhood in there, a lot of moms supporting these trans people, including me. So yeah, it was kind of like getting to that phase of like the story came together in editing, and then when it was released, we were like, okay, yes, that did make sense. This went okay.
Yeah, yeah. You know, it's funny. I think we always say or at least people say mothers know, right? Like they always have some sense of something. So you know, and that relationship between a child and their mom, for whatever reason, always seems like this conversation that we have to explore. And I think what happened in the telling of this, I think there is a beautiful narrative of that relationship between a number of these individuals and their parents, if that they were part of that process. But I think it does come out, right? Like narrative of your sort of family also slowly comes out and is infused
Yeah.
well in these spaces. So I would like to spend some time talking about the characters and the individual ones, and I want to transition there because you've highlighted sort of how you met some folks and that story. Um, I want to just make a call out to one of the questions, which is not really a question. I think, as they say, this isn't really a question, Chris Madden, but just a thank you. Really, Chris says that they really loved hearing Ivana and Shane's voices specifically, and so that's, you know, so I think that's something that I want to explore is these wonderful voices that allowed us into their lives, that spoke their truth. Um, and shared with so many people. So the first one that I watched, actually, we shared with our members here at Stonewall, was Rebecca's story. So Texas, you know, and we were intentional about choosing that, or at least I was intentional about choosing that specific one because of the intersection of identities. Rebecca is a Mexican immigrant, you know, brought to the U.S. by family, and then was in a detention center. So like all of these poignant things that I think as a community and culture and country we're talking about now, you know, it just seems so relevant to be able to say, let's start with Rebecca, and that story. And that's the one that our community members saw and what we shared with them. But as you said, you knew some folks from Facebook, and you kind of sort of sought other folks out. Maybe if I'm breaking apart, we'll start with Texas and Rebecca's story. How, like, what was that journey like? You know, I think it's such an intersection in terms of identity and story. You know, being brought to America and then being detained later on as a trans person, and having all of these rules sort of impressed upon her while she was in a detention center. You know, by not giving her the basic supplies is that she needed to live her truth. You know, a lot of that stuff was there. So let's talk a little bit about what was that journey like in working with Rebecca in that story.
Yes. Oh man. That to me, that episode, it hits me hard too. I'm glad that was the one you watched. So it hits me hard because as someone who's first generation had parents who immigrated here, I understood her story a lot, and I could connect with her and her mom on a very deep level. Filming that, I think I cried the most in that state and in that episode because I knew Rebecca before and I knew how much trauma she had been through. And just like seeing in person, going to the detention center there with her and discussing that there, and also seeing her mom, how loving her mom and her nephews and nieces are, that hit me because I will reveal something to you all. During the filming of that scene where Rebecca and her mom hugged, we were all bawling, and I told the cameraman to move the camera away because I was crying, and he cried, and the whole crew was crying because it happened spur of the moment. Like we didn't plan it, but Rebecca and her mom were just like started crying and hugging each other because they realized how much she had been through and how much they love each other. Because even her mom, even in the series, switched pronouns, and that was intentional on our end when she was referencing her. And I think her mom is someone who started out really religious and Catholic and became really supportive of her, and it just showed the full kind of circle that could happen. And when I saw that hug, because I was there at the table, I was like, move the camera away. So like getting so intimate into like Rebecca's story and her trauma regarding ICE and what she went through really hit me hard because it showed what the worst of the worst was under the Trump administration, how much he attacked immigrants, people of color. trans people, all of that. And she wasn't just detained one time, she was actually detained 4 times. And as you mentioned, none of the times was she housed with women, like at all. And it's crazy because it's like nobody deserves to be treated like that. So it hit me hard. That was the hardest state, I think, to film in. They were all hard, but it hit home really bad. Yeah.
It was also telling, I think, in this episode. It spoke to me a lot, I think, probably because of the immigrant story and all of these different things as well. But I remember the scene where the family was just together. You mentioned the, nephews and that, like, and cooking in the kitchen, and it was such a normal thing. And I think for so many families, or at least I hope for many families, like, there's that experience of cooking together, of coming together and breaking bread or communing in family. And that was just such a beautiful moment to sort of witness, right? Like how the family came together and say, hey, like, she's our aunt. We don't, we don't look at her any differently. I think one of the nephews just was like the most amazing person. Like, I mean, just profusive about sort of the energy that Rebecca brought to the fore. And that was just, again, to me, it was just a beautiful moment to capture, to see family coming together in that way and eat, and literally they were just making a meal. So it made a great sense of normalcy, to something that people maybe don't see as normal, which I thought was beautiful. Um, the next journey that I went on after Rebecca in Texas was Ash in North Carolina. And as I watched Ash's story, I only kept thinking about where I was when I was in high school and what I was going through. And maybe my journey, right? Like, my mother passed away when I was young. I grew up in a single parent home, and so there was sort of the struggle and strife of like that. Right. And then there was the understanding and identity politics of learning, about being gay and what that meant. But I couldn't imagine being Ash's age, right? And having all of these extras, like, there, right? Like, especially in North Carolina, right? Like, here is literally a bill that's telling me, right? Like, my identity is causing people such a problem, right? Like, uh, I give so much sort of I don't even props, kudos, I don't even know what the word is that they use these days, to Ash for being so secure in their story and being able to share that. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what that journey was like, and as you said, finding a young person and their family who were supportive of being able to tell that story.
Yeah, definitely. And I felt similar about like my perception of the Ash episode and like meeting Ash and Daisy, and how, like, to echo what you said about not feeling the same in high school. And it's like such a testament to Gen Z being awesome. They're incredibly like gender non-conforming and they seem to not care. And I'm like, this is crazy because I'm 33 and I'm a millennial, didn't have YouTube in middle school, didn't even know what trans was.
Yeah, and I'm so appreciative of them for pushing us in these ways that we
Exactly.
couldn't have pushed ourselves, which I love.
Yeah, and I didn't even hear the word trans until I was 19. So yeah, when I like that process of like filming there, and like that, like Ash taught me a lot about myself, and I feel like I taught him a little bit of like kind of mentorship, and so we had that dynamic in that first episode, which is why we put it first, because like it addresses gender dysphoria, dead naming, all that, and I could reveal a little bit of my physical transition. So we're like, Ash is also cool, he can go first because he's like the youngest as well. So yeah, I think what I realized like in that state and just like that community that he has around him, including his mom, is like the progress that trans and queer rights have made, like we've been talking about since Stonewall and since other, even like 10 years ago. Um, Ash really showed me that, because here's a young trans boy in North Carolina with HB2, still that's enforceable, having this like support of his friends and going through and studying and getting good grades despite like holding, like literally not going to the bathroom at school. I thought to myself, well, wow, that does show the things we still need as trans and queer people, but it also shows the progress we've made, because Ash is able to tell his mom at 12, I'm trans. I know what trans is. I'm trans. And then Daisy supports him and he can start hormones at 15. that's wild. That in when I was like, growing up, like if you tried to do that, your parents would be like, no, 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 no. Like at least my parents would be.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I can empathize that with, I mean, and that, like, I mean, you know, again, I grew up in a single parent home, and I mean, I couldn't even say that. I can remember my mother telling me before the words came out of my mouth, "You're not that." Right. Like before I could express myself, my mother was telling me that I wasn't a thing. So, I mean, like that thing. So like, that's again, amazing.
Oh yeah, no, exactly, exactly. And like I feel like a lot of people that have watched like North Carolina have said like I love I love it the most. Well, because I love all the episodes, but that one's cool because wow, Ash is awesome. He's a badass. He's a cool teen, and his mother Daisy is like a rock. And yeah, I guess like that I did learn those things while there, but I also kind of learned too as well like what the future can hold. Once I'm like in my old age, I'll be like, whoa, that's crazy. But I feel like they can kind of push the pin forward. They can carry the torch because, if they can do it and they can live freely, what's the next generation going to do after them? So that's interesting. That was my biggest takeaway. So I feel like North Carolina, there were parts where I cried because I cried in every state, but I cried because I was like, oh my God, like, why does Ash have to go through this? And then I realized, like, shit, my teenage years sucked. But I had the most hope in North Carolina because I was like, this is cool. Like, this is a cool situation. And I think another thing, too, that I found was when trans and queer people are accepted by at least one family member or a friend or someone, especially in these hostile states, that can actually improve a lot of statistics for them, reduce suicide, reduce like depression, and they can kind of be themselves. So I realized like, wow, these characters, including Ash, are just like surrounded by love. And I hope that everyone can be.
I'm trying not to get to the end question, like one of the extra questions that I have, right? Because I want to explore each of these, but I think this is what this was about to me, right? Like it's part of that story. You know, here I sit as executive director of Stonewall Columbus, and I understand that there are identities and people who just don't have access to that kind of support, right? Like that don't have a friend or a cousin or someone in their corner, right? And I think when we create these opportunities, these digital opportunities, quite frankly, that people can see themselves in spaces, and see that there are affirming people out there, it does actually save lives, right? To me, right? Like that's the important thing, is that through these new uses of communication and digital engagement, the young person who feels isolated in the middle of nowhere, right, may be able to log in and watch a video or see how people in other places are expressing and giving love, and have a positive self-image from that viewing. Right. And so I'm trying not to answer the question I'm going to go to towards the end, but I think that's the thing that again, I think people hopefully are seeing from why it's so important to have representation, right? Like to have these images and to have people out there telling their stories is because someone else somewhere else needs to see it so they can feel affirmed and be affirmed, and sort of, live to be their full selves. And I think Ash does that so much. And I think, you're right. Like I had my own struggles growing up, but I think watching Ash, it was like, I was so pleased to see the young folks around Ash and how they were responding. And I'm sure that's not everyone, right? But even to see that there was enough young folks that this Ash is Ash. Like we don't know anything else, right? This is who we know and who we love and appreciate. And I think that was exciting, because I definitely know, even as a young person, going through my own journey, that acceptance wasn't so prevalent, public, and from my peers, right? It wasn't like that. And again, this is why I'm so appreciative of sort of how how our young folks are pushing us to this new place, of understanding and acceptance. So after, we've got North Carolina, we've got Texas, and then we went to Mississippi, and I was excited about Mississippi for so many reasons, because I lived in the South. I lived in Atlanta, Georgia for a number of years. And I remember sort of that awakening, moving from New York, going down to Atlanta, and that experience was like, wow, the South is different. And what I really loved about, Ivana's story was the space in which she exists, the creation of an organization to support identity, how the community that that she is in sort of it is welcoming, but differently so. Like there were all these things that really, again, reflected a little bit of a story of the South, but then also that journey down there. And yeah, and as a nonprofit person, I think I also probably just latched onto that as well because I understood the hard work that goes into running a nonprofit organization and being able to provide services to a community while raising funds to support that community as well, to support the work. What was that? What was it like being down in Mississippi? MISSI
I know, right? I had to like when I was typing Mississippi and like all these emails, it was like autocorrect, like you missed an S or you didn't put in like you put too many. I was like, oh my God. I was like repeating that in my head. Yes, Jack. Okay. One of my favorite episodes too. They're all great. I love them all, but episode 3, because Ivana is just wild. Like she's amazing. I sometimes will be going for a run or a walk and will hear her saying, "All these furs, baby," in my head. And I'm like, why am I hearing this? Or I'll hear like the beginning preacher or like just like I won't give away too much for everyone who watch it, but like the church scene, like there's so many quotes
Yeah,
in
yeah,
there that like just stick with you. And Ivana is like that in person that she is on screen. So she's great.
yeah.
So filming in Jackson, I had never been to Mississippi. I've been to Alabama before, to Birmingham. So I kind of knew going into it, like kind of what the dynamic is in the Bible Belt. And I knew that, like, don't reveal trans and Trumpland in any of these states. If someone asked the crew, like I told my crew, I was like, don't tell them what we're filming, right? So when we were at Jackson, I feel like I was the only one that had been to like the Bible Belt. I think everyone else was like really taken aback because filming there, the reminders of racism and segregation and classism are very, very apparent, more so than anywhere else. It's like very apparent. Because even when we were together, my mixed crew with Ivana, who's a Black trans woman, people were staring at us. That wouldn't happen in New York, but people were staring at us.
They're like, "What are
So
y'all doing with that woman?
exactly, what are you
What's going?
doing?
What's going? Yeah."
Yeah. What is this like tall woman doing with these like shorter white men? They're like, what? So we stuck out and people would ask, and we're like, we're just filming about her nonprofit. That's all we'd say. So filming there, it definitely felt like unsafe. I wouldn't say it was like I feel like they were all unsafe in their own separate ways. We actually got like accosted the most in North Carolina. And there was like this group of like 2 or 3 like men in a truck that were like, what are y'all filming? And we're like, oh, nothing. And then they kept asking us for like 30 minutes until we told them. And I said, we're filming Hunger Games 4 because they filmed Hunger Games there. And then they drove off. They're like, that's cool, have fun. And I'm like, okay, bye, like see you later. So I feel like people in Mississippi like more minded their business because I feel like that's part of the culture. I've heard that in the South, like you mind your business in person, but then talk shit in the house.
This is the truth. This is
Yes.
the truth.
And
I
I
mean,
feel like in New York, you're like, I'm going to talk shit to your
your
face.
face.
So yeah, that's what happened in Mississippi. But I feel like I laugh the most in Mississippi because everything she says and like everything about Ivana is like amazing. And the fact that she exists in Mississippi and is staying there, hell yeah, Ivana's amazing. I love her. Yeah.
And again, this is probably me projecting my notions of the South. I think when you are in communities and they know who you are, they wrap their arms around you, right? Like, and so oftentimes they may not talk about it, like as you said out loud, right? Like he's got sugar in his tank, but nobody's going to talk about it in person. They're going to talk about it behind the scenes, right? Right? Or the preacher may say something at church, but they're going to love you, but they're going to say something about it, right? And I think that is it's such an interesting thing in the South, but I think when people know you, they know you, right? And I think that's the beautiful thing that I have seen, right? Like once, that's the notion of changing hearts and minds, right? Like, which is the important work, right? Like here's Ivana, who people have probably gotten to know, right? And who they see, and they see the good work that she's doing. And so they may not agree with everything, but they're going to love her and her heart. And I think that's just always something interesting about the South, like to me, right? They're going to, they're gonna be nice in your face, but they may say something behind your back. But when they know you, they're gonna love your heart and they're gonna support you for that. And I think, that came across, to me, at least, as I watched this. Right? Yes, there were struggles and there was strife, but what she did and why she's staying there is because this community, is a community that she realizes is supportive in their own way, but there's still members of the community that need more support, and she is there for those identities who don't feel comfortable, right, speaking up and speaking out all the time. And that's the beauty, I think, in that work, is that now all of a sudden she is living her truth, and then trying to give voice, find voice, and make space for those who don't feel comfortable fully in that space yet, which is such a great lesson, I think, and a wonderful thing for anyone to be able to see. Um,
I agree with you to all of that.
yeah,
Yeah.
that,
And like people will love you. Yeah, like she's such a cool community member and she helps them out. And I do think there's a lot more people in Mississippi that, probably are queer or trans, but are afraid to speak their truth, as Imana said, or walk in their truth. Yeah. So I agree to all of that.
yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
and again, I guess just being from or living in the South after a couple of years in Atlanta, it was a welcome sort of journey, and hopefully, again, as I said earlier, like you do such a great job of bringing people to different parts of the country and those experiences. So that was really great. I will say that um, Idaho was fun for me, for a number of reasons. In terms of watching Shane and that story, I, it, I in my own journey in sort of college education and learning, I spent a lot of time learning about Verdace and Two Spirit and what that meant, because I think as I sort of still figure out who I am, right? Like even today at 40, I'll accept that I'm 40. I think I look good, right? But like, right, like identity is such this thing. Like I struggle with the dichotomy of the world, right? This binary of all these things, and so when I learned about Verdace and Two Spirit, and I'm Verdace a different country, but learning about Two Spirit and all these things, like it was beautiful for me to go on that journey. And so when I was learning about Shane and Shane's story and being a part of the military and all these things, I um, there was an extra level of happiness in that story, because I think the ability for the community to think about gender and identity in a much more fluid way, and to see that there are communities who wrap their arms around that, right, like Two Spirit folks in a lot of Native American cultures are held to this sort of this high level of regard, right, like that your ability to navigate this space is something to be sort of lifted up, sometimes seen as I don't want to say godlike, but supreme other level being like. But that struggle that Shane, I think maybe I saw, was here is this community of identity, and that we talk about Two Spirit, and then yet you're in the military, and in the military they're like, you're one or the other, and we're just not going to talk about anything in the space in between. And so what was that journey like for you to work with Shane and to just listen to those stories and be in that space?
Yeah, no, definitely. And even like when I was there and just watching the series now, that episode 4, I feel like this is similar to like what you're echoing. Was like it felt like such a mystical space, especially being on the reservation there. And so like being on the ground there, I felt like there was something so unique about Idaho and the space that Shane inhabits and his identity and his experience that was so different from the other 3 episodes. And what I realized too, similarly in like Idaho, and I'll give an example of this, is like someone that we like one of our production assistants went to get like sandwiches for lunch, and there was like a white woman there who was a native who said like, oh, what you all filming? And we just said like, oh, we're filming like something about a native person. And she goes like, wow, I feel so bad for what our country has done to Native Americans. We were like very taken aback. So I feel like Idaho, for us in filming Shane's story and just being there, it really resisted dichotomies in a way. And it did show me that like kind of no matter where we are in the country, like there's gonna be good-hearted people and there's gonna be evil-hearted people. There's gonna be people in the middle. That's just like how humans work. That's a whole nother conversation. But like filming in Idaho is like interesting too because like it kind of showed that like Shane balances this like spirituality with this military experience with like resisting to be like I'm a man or a girl or woman or I'm not uh a like macho guy. I also participate in like sun dances. And so kind of like in realizing that and knowing how two-spirit have always existed on this land and kind of how transphobia is linked to colonization, that was very eye-opening because I had read a little bit about it, but I didn't realize how much it could offer hope for the future of the country. Because let's be real here. Um, Transphobia and queerphobia and homophobia in this country, it kind of largely exists because of colonialism. Because a lot of Native cultures in this country, like we have a space for these identities and these experiences. So Shane and opening up about that, I think taught me a lot and taught my crew a lot about that. Yeah, for sure.
Well, I think that's, and again, this is why this is, I wish everyone would watch all four of them, right? And if you had the opportunity to do more, I wish you would, and I wish you could, right? Because everything is, it's been such a learning journey. Like, I am sure there's so many people in the community and in the country who don't understand or know about two-spirit identities, right? And so I hope, right, that after watching this they think, well, I'm just going to dig a little deeper into what that is. You know, I was privileged enough to have done this study and sort of understanding when I was in college, because it was important for me, right, to understand humanity and all of the various beautiful things that were there. Like, this was important for me because I wanted to learn to understand gender and identity and all of these things, and not everyone is motivated to that space. But you are so, I think, correct in that, you know, in native cultures, this identity and duality of self is something that is sort of welcomed or embraced or understood, and there's language around it, where I think in this colonial space, because we were so constricted, right, and biblical and all these things, like we were so prescriptive about gender and responsibility and all these different things, and how we had to be dichotomous and sort of subjective, in terms of hierarchy. And I think what was beautiful about Shane's story, I think, as you highlighted, is that Shane seems to navigate these worlds, well, right? Like, still there's struggle and strife. Like, that was not what, you know, right? Like, that there was nothing there, but it was still this understanding of, my beginning may be different because I understood that duality of self or identity, is something that, is existing within the culture and community that I'm a part of. You know, and so I think hopefully, other folks and other young people or people in general who watch that, sort of lean on that more, to say, or see the distinction between, a colonial world that has sort of imperialized these things on them, and understanding of another culture and an identity that is not as, strict or prescriptive in relation to dichotomies of gender identity and so forth. Uh, you know, yeah, Shane just took me on a great journey anyway. But again, I knew this backstory, right? Like, I'm coming from a place of information and knowing that. And, so I this is where I wanted to ask, why is this film so important? Like, why are these films so important? Like, why, like what is it for you, right? Like, yes, we said we got to do this, but, you know, when we think about it from just a societal space, and someone said, what do you think is like the most important reason why you created this film? How would you, how might you respond to that?
Yeah, I think the most important reason why is because from an ethical standpoint, I could not sit back in 2016 and see this man, meaning Trump, and his administration, plus all of the people that supported him, get away with murder, literally. Because in these past 4 years, I'm not going to say any president so far has been an angel. Our government is complicated, but in these past 4 years, it has led to a spike in trans violence, a spike in trans murders, and hearing the president say at the very top, like, trans people don't exist, that obviously is going to have an echo throughout the country, right? So, from an ethical standpoint, that was my key motivation for creating the series. On a personal level, I was like, I'm trans and I'm Iranian American, so you attacked my level on multiple ways. So like attacking trans people, the Muslim ban that affected my family. Um, and so what I thought was, okay, well, what can I do to kind of be part of all of these people who are resisting in their own ways and ultimately got Trump out of office? And I realized that as a filmmaker, what I could do was document the reality of what it's like to be trans under Trump. And even though we have Biden right now, these states that still voted for him in 2020, they're still Trump land. There's still Trump flags there. I seen it. I've been to some of these states after Biden won. So there was a deep kind of ethical, artistic motivation, personal kind of motivation to create the series, and just to show people what being trans is across the country, what trans rights, what trans equality means, what rights we still need, and to kind of show also that we exist in your communities, and also to kind of offer some hope. I think we need some hope, like we can all come together, and like kind of ensure equality on some level for trans people and just in general. So that's what I would say would be like if someone asked me like what are the reasons why, those would be like the key reasons. Yeah.
Well, I think you said it as well. Trump said trans people don't exist. Well, you are demonstrating and showing that they do exist, right? Like you're documenting their stories, you're uplifting their stories, and in perpetuity, right? We will have these stories, at least these 4 stories, and hopefully more stories of people telling their truth and living into it. So I think you're showing Trump that trans people do exist. They everywhere, as you just said, within all of our communities, which I think is a truly powerful thing to do. Being able to tell the story of communities is tantamount to to ensuring that our existence is known even after we're gone, right? So being able to tell those stories is important as well. So yeah.
Exactly. I think, yeah, showing trans and queer people like in documentaries and shows and whatnot, even more and more, it's just going to show the country more that maybe is like homophobic or transphobic. Like, hey, we are here. We have these experiences, and yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, I mean, from a personal place, it's been great to be able to tell my family, hey, you need to watch these. I've been exploring a lot of different trans productions over the last year, just again for my own personal learning. But I think also the world is saying, oh, we got to put more information out there, which I'm glad for, right? Like I'm glad to see that there's more options and opportunities for digital engagement that is helping people learn about trans identities. But over the last year, I think I've just been watching a lot of things, and it's been great for this to share with my family in particular, because I have trans family members that are part of this story, and being able to say, hey, right, like this is our family member is not the only one, right? Here are other stories of people who have gone on this journey. I mean, here are some reflections of families who have been a part of this journey. And again, I think that's another added beauty in this moment of being able to have stories and identities that other people can share with their families and say, look at this journey, look at how they've worked through things, or what they're working at as well. So, I'm just so thankful that that you did it, right? Like I'm so thankful that you felt so strongly enough to do this. I'm sorry that Trump had to be the impetus for it, right? But I'm so thankful that that there was enough inspiration to say this is the right thing to do. So one of the things, right, is sort of we alluded to some of it, but maybe this is more a moment to give thanks to folks. So I'm asking like how did it all come together? The back end of things, who do you think helped out the most during this process? And so I think when I say this, right, because when I was looking at credits and producers, I'm like, you've got some amazing EPs, right? Like you've got Chalaman and Miss Major, like that was exciting for me to kind of see these identities that I've come to know, that I don't know that other community members may know in the same way. So I guess the question is, right, like how did that nice little bow come together in the end? But really more so, it's sort of like, who are the of people you would say thank you to for helping get it to this space?
Yeah, definitely. I would say my producer Jamie that I co-run Transwave Films with. My EP definitely Traceless Set. I came on board first. Miss Major, Griffin Gracie, awesome Stonewall veteran, and Chella Mann, who's an awesome activist as well. And they kind of helped definitely kind of shape the creative feedback when we were editing and say like, oh, we don't like this or we like that, and just help with like getting the word out there. Um, I'd also say my director of photography, Leroy, he was awesome in capturing the sweet footage that can be seen in the series. So he was really great to work with. Who else? Like a ton of people. My editor, Jason, my sound guy, Andrew. There's so many people to thank. I would say those like the core people. My brother as well, my family, my friends that have kind of gotten me to this. And what I learned, especially as a trans filmmaker, is like it's a collaborative process and it takes a team. And if you don't have the support around you, then you're not going to be, I think, as successful, or your kind of approach to filmmaking won't be as diverse. So I would say those were like the team members that got me through there. And like, yeah, executive producers and Trace and Miss Major and Chella, they really helped everything come together.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm paying attention to time, 7:31. And so we had some, I think some of the questions that we had, I probably asked as we were answering, or there is one which I'm actually, I want to throw out right now, is from a visitor from Canada. And I'm not going to say this name right. I'm going to say Kirsten. With it's got a J in it, so Kirsten. But the question is, as a proud trans woman in Canada, how can I support and assist my trans brothers and trans sisters in the USA, especially when it comes to the cost of gender reassignment surgery? So I don't know if you have an answer to that. I'm thinking of a resource, but I don't know if you have any thoughts about how can someone who is not in the U.S. Still be supportive of trans identities in the U.S.
Yeah. Well, hello, Canadian viewer. Um, Thank you for your country being awesome. We in the United States still have a lot of work to do. So good news is Trans and Trumpland is available in Canada as well. So if you go on Topic or Amazon Prime or Apple TV in Canada, it should be available. Reach out if it isn't, but that's what we were told by Topic, which is like our distribution company. So there's that. So feel free to share it with your friends and family. In terms of supporting like your trans siblings here, especially when it comes to gender reassignment surgery, that's a good question. And I'll say part of my answer to that is we still don't have a federal level mandate, which is a travesty, to cover trans hormones and trans surgery on a federal level. So you can cross the border, say, like giving an example, like leave Ohio and go to Nebraska, and Nebraska's like, nope, we don't cover that. So maybe what you could do from afar for us is advocate, like maybe if there's like ever a change.org petition to try and get the federal level inclusion, which would include all 50 states covering gender reassignment surgery, sign it, share it. Because I know a lot of times those petitions don't care where you live. Speak up on social media maybe too as well, and say like, hey, this is happening in the US, like advocate for this bill. Hey, so and so, my friend in like Texas, like sign this or do this bill. That's what I would say would be like my answers in terms of like supporting from afar. Yeah.
Wonderful, great. And I would add that there are a number of U.S.-based nonprofit organizations who also have direct impact funds to support gender reassignment surgery or affirming surgery. So I think that's something that is actually a thing to think about, right? If you are able to identify U.S.-based organizations and that specifically are meeting the needs of our trans community as it comes to gender affirming processes. So maybe not even just singularly surgery, but the same thing comes to folks who are trying to get IDs and other sort of assets, associated assets with identity. So looking at some organizations locally, I think, or in the states who support that would be a great thing. I know here at Stonewall, that's something that we are starting to think about and start to do the early plannings of is, being being able to create a fund that directly, again, gives direct access to resources to support the community. Because we understand that so many people in the community, there's a large number of our community who can't afford the surgery or associated sort of needs of support for affirmation. So that is something to consider as well. So thank you so much for that question. Another question we have here is, what do you think was the hardest part of documenting this story or these stories?
Yeah. Oh, the hardest part was seeing how much people who are outside of states that are inclusive, like New York City or say California, how much they're truly impacted, regardless of like who's president, because it's still under Biden, they're suffering. Seeing how badly they're impacted by these policies, because we like to think about policies as like these things that are up in the air, they're like complicated, but at the end of the day, they impact people, they impact their day-to-day life. Means that Rebecca's thrown in a men's prison, Ash isn't able to go to the bathroom, etc. And so I think that realizing that the headlines that I was seeing before filming were true, and hearing from each person, that impacted me the most. And I think it was hard sometimes to kind of like go home with that and just like at the end of a production day, like sit with that. And so I was like, well, I feel like hopefully I'm doing enough to help them out. So I would say that was the hardest part. And just knowing that we couldn't release like the name of the film while we were there was really tough, because I felt like we kind of had to operate in like secrecy sort of. So that's what I would say was the hardest part, and just like kind of feeling helpless at times as well, you know.
I don't know if this was fully informed everywhere, so I'm trying to think of how to phrase this better. So it's, I think what from my research and what I've seen was that you had a number of other trans identities working on the film. Was that again an intentional choice, right? Like to say, hey, I want to uplift and bring people along for that story, for that journey, or was it just a I don't want to say an accidental happenstance, but what was that intentional sort of process for you in terms of identifying who you brought along in the journey of filming?
Yeah, definitely. So the production company that I co-run with Jamie is trans led, and so we believe in putting trans and queer people in front of the camera, but also behind the camera. And so, kind of like what I did to kind of like how I approached this series and filming it was, I wanted to have a diverse crew, compromised of like all kinds of people, but ultimately we're all committed at the end of the day to trans inclusion, queer inclusion, making sure that we put every character subject in every state. My priority was their safety, the safety of my crew, because on set, we had non-binary people, we had trans women, we had trans men, we had queer men, we had straight people, and like we all had to work together to make sure that we stayed safe in these states, and ultimately too we're able to honor each person's unique journey in all these states, like Ash, Rebecca, Ivana, and Shane, and kind of like prioritize that. So yeah, that's what I would say was my kind of like the approach I took, was make sure it was like trans run at the end of the day and trans led, which sometimes doesn't happen.
I mean, I think I think it's great that you were able to lean in and do that, right? I think, and also being able to bring people along, a diverse group of people on this journey, which I'm sure, and again, I hope, I don't know, I'm thinking, sort of has been impactful for them, right? Like after the fact, like I don't know how you could be a part of this and not feel and be impacted in some deep way, of course, because I'm just watching it and I feel like so impacted. So I hope that journey has been a revealing or opening one for those folks who are part of that too. So I think that is the last question that I'm seeing here in this list, in these lists. I want to start to wrap up and sort of finally, my closing question, after sort of seeing all of the things that you've done and the films that you've made and really enjoying these four sort of intimate moments. What's next? Like where do you see yourself going next? That's like the college, the college question as you're getting ready to graduate. What are you gonna do after you graduate? But I mean, what do you think? Are you working on a project now? Like, or what's sort of the next journey for you?
Yeah, definitely. So the next thing is a scripted film, a biopic about a trans activist from the 1980s. So that's one project. The other one is a queer trans dating show. That's like I'm like, oh, reality TV, because it's blends documentary plus, like, who doesn't want to watch something dating related. And then another thing too that I'm thinking about, maybe down the line, a couple of years, who knows, a follow-up documentary, Transit Trumpland, maybe a season two. Hopefully Biden stays in office for the next 4 years. We'll see. So those are like the things that I'm working on, and no matter what I do, I just want to continue to advance trans and queer rights, and do that through filmmaking, and make sure that we can have some form of equality for our community.
Well, I say thank you for that, and thank you for living your truth and doing it so openly, and then uplifting the stories of others. Our community is so beautifully diverse, and anytime I think we have the opportunity to learn about other people, we should. And anytime we have the opportunity to learn about other people through their own voices is the best way to learn other stories. So I'm so appreciative of you, and thank you so much for taking us all on what I think is a really beautiful learning journey. That I think will inspire lots of people to think deeply and critically about how they live and exist in the world. But I think also, will be something that saves lives, quite frankly. I will definitely say that. I think there will be people who see these stories, these wonderful reflections of people, of humanity, who are then able to say, I can and I will. So thank you so much for that. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say thank you so much. It was my pleasure. And also thank you, Denzel, for hosting this and for the work that Stonewall Columbus does. Because I think, as Ivana's episode shows, especially, like, organizations and activists and just like this kind of work is like how I feel like we can kind of all get equality, which we all deserve. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I'm going to do my closing out bit here to say once again thank you. For those of you who are with us this evening, thank you all so much for joining us. It was a pleasure to have a conversation with Tony, and hopefully we'll have some more conversations with other filmmakers, speakers, and guests as we move along in today's journey, but also in the rest of our journey as 40 years here in Columbus. If you are interested in checking out and finding out more about upcoming events and programs, please do visit stonewallcolumbus.org for events and information. And if you are so inclined, because we are a nonprofit organization and fundraising is always central to what we do, do go back to our website, stonewallcolumbus.org/donate, and consider making a donation to help us continue these wonderful and great programs. So thank you all so much. It was a pleasure chatting with everyone this evening. And Tony, hopefully we'll be in touch soon. I'm following you on Twitter and social media, so I'm gonna be all up on your social space.
Yeah, same. Nice. I was like, follow back. Yes. Denzel. And hey, let me know if you ever want to do a follow-up conversation. I'll keep you updated. And I hope everyone, I guess, is in North America. So have a good evening.
Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Bye.
Bye, ciao.